Blood money, the Gangnam Mansion, murders, disclaimer. This is a true story about a horrific crime that shocked South Korea in 1994. Names have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. This content is intended for mature audiences 18, only due to graphic descriptions of violence. The details shared are for educational purposes. Please do not attempt to imitate any actions described in this case study. Introduction. Summary. Hey viewers, Detective Sune here. Before we dive into today's harrowing case, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss one of our cold case investigations. Imagine a luxurious mansion in Seoul's most exclusive neighborhood engulfed in flames on a quiet May night in 1994. When firefighters extinguished the blaze, they discovered two charred bodies, wealthy business owners with more than 30 stab wounds each. Their 23-year-old son claimed to have barely escaped with his life, but things weren't adding up. The Park family had built an empire from a humble pharmacy into a multi-million-dollar Oriental medicine business. Their oldest son, once their golden child, had descended into a spiral of gambling, debt, and deceit. After squandering thousands in American casinos and facing mounting loan shark threats, he returned to South Korea in disgrace. When his father's harsh words rang in his ears, "You can't do anything right," something snapped inside him. What followed was one of South Korea's most shocking crimes. A premeditated patricide inspired by crime movies, a calculated attempt to inherit the family fortune, and a sloppy cover-up that would ultimately crumble due to a single bite mark and traces of blood the killer forgot to wash from his hair. Join me as I walk you through my investigation of the 1994 Gangnam Mansion murders, where greed, entitlement, and delusion transformed a privileged son into a cold-blooded killer who stabbed his sleeping parents dozens of times before setting their bodies ablaze. It's a case that asks us, how far would someone go for wealth, and what happens when parental expectation meets unchecked entitlement? Let's begin unraveling this disturbing case together. Act 1. The Fire That Revealed Murder, May 20th, 1994. Seoul, South Korea. The call came in at 3:17 a.m., just as I was finishing my paperwork from another case. A fire at a mansion in Samong-dong, Gangnam District owned, of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Seoul. This wasn't my usual jurisdiction, but something about the caller's voice caught my attention. Too controlled, too rehearsed. I decided to drive over. By the time I arrived, the flames were already extinguished. The mansion, a 5,400 square foot marvel of modern architecture with a perfectly manicured lawn, was partially blackened, smoke still lingering in the night air. The smell of gasoline was unmistakable even beneath the charred wood and melted plastics. Detective Sune. I introduced myself to the fire chief. "Mind if I take a look?" "You're going to want to see this," he said, leading me through the mansion's grand entrance. We found two bodies in the master bedroom. Initial assessment suggests they were deceased before the fire started. Inside the bedroom, even in the dim emergency lighting, I could see this was no ordinary fire. The bodies were charred, yes, but the pattern of burning was inconsistent with typical fire deaths. And there was still fresh blood seeping from multiple wounds. "This is Dr. and Mrs. Park," the fire chief informed me, owners of a chain of Oriental medicine pharmacies, worth millions. Their son and a young cousin made it out alive. I crouched beside the bodies, careful not to disturb the scene. "These aren't burn wounds," I muttered. studying the visible gashes on Dr. Park's neck. These are stab wounds. Multiple stab wounds. The Sun Park Jinho claims. He woke up to the sounds of breaking glass, tried to reach his parents' room, but couldn't due to the flames, so he escaped through a window and called emergency services, the fire chief said. He's been taken to Gangnam Hospital with minor injuries. How convenient, I remarked, standing up. Something about this narrative already felt wrong. Where was his room in relation to his parents? Down the hall, maybe 20 feet away. I walked the distance, studying the burn patterns on the walls. The fire started in the parents' room and spread outward. If Jinho's story is true, he would have had plenty of time to at least try to save them before the flames became unmanageable. What are you thinking? The fire chief asked. I'm thinking we're looking at murder, poorly disguised as an accidental fire death. I pulled out my notebook. Was anything stolen? That's the strangest part, he replied. There's a safe in the study with jewelry, cash, and financial documents, all untouched. If this was a robbery gone wrong, they picked the one room with nothing valuable in it. Or, I paused, looking back at the bodies. Maybe it wasn't a stranger at all. I examined the bedroom carefully. The burn pattern suggested an accelerant had been used, poured directly onto and around the bodies. I requested immediate forensic analysis and a full autopsy for both victims. If my suspicions were correct, this wasn't a random act of violence. It was personal, calculated, and executed by someone who knew exactly where the Parks would be sleeping. Get me everything you can on the Sun, I told my partner as we left the scene. I want to know where he's been, who he's been with, and especially his financial situation. Something tells me there's a lot more to this story than a tragic house fire. As dawn broke over Seoul's skyline, I headed to Gangnam Hospital. If Jinho thought his story about heroically escaping the fire would hold water, he was about to learn that some crimes leave traces that even flames can't erase. Would you have checked the Sun's background immediately or waited for the autopsy results first? I wonder as I look through my notes. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Acta 2, The Perfect Son's Imperfect Alibi. When I arrived at Gangnam Hospital, Jinho was being treated for minor burns and cuts to his hands and feet injuries, consistent with escaping through broken glass. At first glance, he looked every bit the traumatized survivor. Bandaged hands, tear-stained face, disheveled hair. But 20 years of detective work has taught me to look beyond the obvious. Mr. Park, I'm Detective Sherman, I said, pulling up a chair beside his bed. I need to ask you a few questions about what happened tonight. Jinho nodded weakly, his eyes downcast. I still can't believe they're gone. I tried to save them, I really did. But the fire... Why don't you walk me through exactly what happened, I suggested, keeping my tone conversational. Start from when you first woke up. His account was polished, almost too perfect. He described hearing glass breaking, opening his door to see hallway flames, desperately calling out for his parents but being forced back by the heat. Then breaking his bedroom window with a chair and jumping out, running to a neighbor's house to call emergency services. That must have been terrifying, I said, watching his eyes carefully. What were you wearing when you escaped? He hesitated just for a moment. Just my pajama sweatpants and a t-shirt. The same clothes you're wearing now? Yes, he replied. Well, they gave me this hospital gown for examination. I nodded, making notes. And your cousin Minjin, is it? Where was he during all this? He was sleeping in another guest room on the same floor. I managed to wake him up on my way out. This didn't align with the fire pattern I'd observed. If Jin-ho had time to alert his cousin, he would have had time to at least attempt to reach his parents. Jin-ho, the initial investigation suggests the fire started in your parents' bedroom, I said, watching his reaction closely. If that's the case, how did flames in the hallway prevent you from reaching them? The fire would have spread outward from their room. His expression flickered, fear, then quick calculation. Maybe it started somewhere else first. I don't know. Everything happened so fast. I understand, I said, softening my approach. Have you been in touch with your brother, Young-suk? No, he's at medical school, Jin-ho replied. Someone has to tell him. Our parents are gone. His voice broke, and tears welled up in his eyes. I noticed a nurse hovering nearby, wanting to check Jin-ho's bandages. I stood up. I'll give you some privacy for your medical care. One of my officers will stay outside to make sure you're not disturbed by reporters. This is a high-profile case, after all. Translation: you're not going anywhere without us knowing. As I stepped into the hallway, the attending nurse approached me. Detective, I don't know if this is important, but we found something unusual during his examination. Go on, I encouraged. There's blood in his hair knot from any head wounds. We checked thoroughly. And there's what appears to be a bite mark on his right ankle. It's fresh, made within the last few hours. My pulse quickened. Did you document this evidence? Yes, we took photographs and samples of the blood. Excellent work. Make sure those samples get to our forensic lab immediately. As I walked down the hospital corridor, the pieces were beginning to fit together. The untouched valuables, the lack of forced entry, the guard dogs that neighbors reported never barked, and now unexplained blood and a bite mark on our surviving victim. I recalled something about the Park family from the initial briefing. Jin-ho was the eldest son, once the pride of his parents, now rumored to be something of a disappointment. His younger brother, meanwhile, was excelling at medical school, fulfilling the family's expectations. I made a call to the station. I need everything you can find on Jin-ho Park's recent activities. School records, travel history, financial statements, credit card transactions, phone records, everything. And get me the family's financial advisor. I want to know who benefits from the Park's death. The more I learned about Jin-ho-hee's gambling habits, his failed studies in America, his mounting debts, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a random act of violence or a tragic accident. This was patricide in its most calculated form. If you were investigating, what would you consider the most damning piece of evidence against Jin-ho so far? The bite mark? The blood in his hair? Or his inconsistent story about the fire's spread? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Act 3. The bloody truth emerges. The funeral was a somber affair. Seoul's business elite gathered to pay respects to the Park family. Watching from a discreet distance, I observed Jin-ho's performance. And it was exactly that performance. One moment, he was sobbing uncontrollably, even fainting dramatically before his parents' coffins. The next, when he thought no one was watching, he was huddled in a corner, whispering urgently into his cell phone. My lip-reading skills caught fragments. Sell everything, go abroad. Business opportunity. A relative approached me afterward, visibly disturbed. Detective, I don't know if this matters, but Jin-ho's behavior, it's strange. Right after crying hysterically, I overheard him on the phone talking about selling his father's assets, and leaving the country. And he was smiling. "Thank you," I replied. "Every detail matters in cases like this." Meanwhile, the forensic results had come back, confirming what I'd suspected. The blood in Jinho's hair was a perfect match for both his parents. More damning still, the bite mark on his ankle matched his father's dental records exactly, Doctor. Park's last desperate act had been to mark his killer. At the crime scene, our forensic team had used luminol to reveal large areas of blood spatter that someone had attempted to clean up. The pattern told a story of frenzied violence, not the controlled action of an outside intruder. I sat in my office, surrounded by crime scene photos, autopsy reports, and Jinho's financial records. The story they told was clear. A privileged son, raised with every advantage, who had squandered opportunities and accumulated massive gambling debts. A young man who had returned from America not with an education, but with loan sharks at his heels. A son who, faced with his father's disappointment, chose murder over redemption. The night of May 19th came into sharp focus. Jinho, planning methodically, had purchased a knife and gasoline a week before. He had waited until everyone was asleep, stripped naked to avoid blood evidence, and covered himself with a bed sheet before entering his parents' room. The attack was brutal: 34 stab wounds to his father, 27 to his mother, executed over a terrifying 10-minute period. After the murders, he had washed himself, changed clothes, doused the bodies with gasoline, and set the fire. Then, in a calculated move, he broke a window from the inside, disposed of the murder weapons in bushes hundreds of meters away, and called the police, playing the role of the traumatized survivor. What Jinho hadn't counted on was his father's final act biting down on his attacker's ankle as life slipped away. Nor had he anticipated that traces of his parents' blood would remain in his hair, despite his attempts to wash away the evidence. On May 26th, just 1 week after the murders, I personally placed Jinho under arrest. Park Jinho, you are under arrest for the murders of Dr. Park Sunwoo and Mrs. Park Meja, I announced, as officers handcuffed him in the temporary residence where he'd been staying. "This is absurd," he protested, but I could see the resignation in his eyes. The game was up, and he knew it. "We have your father's dental impression on your ankle, your parents' blood in your hair, and evidence of extensive cleanup at the crime scene," I stated calmly. "Your father bit you as you killed him, Jinho. His final act was to make sure you wouldn't get away with it." His shoulders slumped. In interrogation, he confessed surprising quickly, almost relieved to unburden himself. His motive? My father's harsh criticism, he claimed. He always said, "You can't do anything right, and you never finish anything properly." For 13 years, I received nothing but criticism. But the financial evidence told another story. Jinho had accumulated massive gambling debts, approximately $37,000, and had been cut off by his parents. His younger brother had succeeded where he had failed, gaining admission to medical school and his parents' approval. Jinho admitted to watching crime movies during his time in America, specifically scenes of sons killing fathers and setting fires to conceal the crimes. I thought if my parents were gone, he confessed, I would inherit their empire. 10 billion won, about 10 million. What he didn't know was that South Korean civil code specifically prohibits murderers from inheriting from their victims. Did you suspect Jinho from the beginning, or were you surprised by the twist in this case? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you're finding this case analysis insightful. Act 4, Justice and Aftermath. On November 4th, 1994, in a packed courtroom at the Seoul District Court, Jin-ho was sentenced to death for the murders of his parents. As the judge read the verdict, Jin-ho, who had confessed during interrogations, suddenly screamed, "I am innocent." His appeals to both the Seoul High Court and the South Korean Supreme Court were rejected, the death sentence upheld at every level. But fate had one final twist for Jin-ho. South Korea's last execution took place on December 30th, 1997, and none have been carried out since. Though the death penalty remains legal in South Korea, Jin-ho's sentence effectively became life imprisonment without parole at Daegu Prison. I visited him there in 2015, more than 20 years after the murders. By then, he was 44 years old, his youthful features hardened by decades behind bars. During a carefully arranged interview, he expressed what seemed like deep remorse. "I think about them every day," he told me, his voice barely above a whisper. "What I did, it can never be undone." But the prison psychologist, who had worked with him for 6 years later, confided in me. "Don't be fooled, detective. His remorse is calculated, just like everything else he does. He's shown no genuine repentance since arriving here." This assessment aligned with reports from prison officials that Jin-ho frequently asked fellow inmates, particularly those convicted of financial crimes, about inheritance laws and asset management. Even after decades, he remained fixated on the wealth he had killed to obtain but would never possess. Perhaps the most tragic figure in this whole affair was Jin-ho's younger brother, Seok. I met with him shortly after he completed medical school, fulfilling the dream his parents had for their sons. He had visited Jin-ho once during the trial, hoping to understand why his brother had destroyed their family. "He looked me in the eye," Seok told me, and insisted he was innocent. After everything, the evidence, his confession, our parents' bodies, he still couldn't admit what he'd done to me, their only remaining son. Seok left that meeting with tears streaming down his face and never saw his brother again. He inherited the family businesses and assets not through the violence Jin-ho had employed, but through his dedicated studies and the tragic loss of his entire family. The Park murders stand as one of South Korea's most notorious crimes, a case study in how privilege without responsibility can warp a person's sense of entitlement. Jin-ho, raised with every advantage, had come to believe he deserved his parents' hard-earned wealth without earning it himself. When faced with their disappointment, he chose to take their lives rather than change his own. As I compiled my final case report, I couldn't help reflecting on the two brothers raised in the same home by the same parents, yet walking such divergent paths. One chose discipline, respect, and achievement. The other chose indulgence, resentment, and ultimately, violence. The Parks had built their fortune from nothing, transforming a small pharmacy into an empire of Oriental medicine. Their eldest son destroyed it all in a single night of bloodshed, gambling away not just money, but his entire future and the lives of those who had given him everything. Some cases leave you with clear answers. This one left me with haunting questions about human nature, about the dangers of unchecked entitlement, and about how easily the bonds of family can be severed when greed takes hold. Conclusion: lessons from the darkness. Before we wrap up today's case, I want to thank you all for joining me on this journey through one of South Korea's most shocking crimes. If you found this analysis valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth investigations into notorious cases from around the world. The Gangnam Mansion murders teach us several critical lessons. First, appearances can be deceiving. Jin-ho's performance as the grieving son nearly worked if not for forensic evidence and astute medical professionals who noticed the blood in his hair and the bite mark on his ankle. Second, the motive for murder is often far simpler than we imagine. Despite Jin-ho's claims about years of criticism, financial records painted a clear picture. He wanted money, and he wanted it immediately, without working for it. Third, evil rarely looks how we expect it to. Jin-ho was educated from a good family with every advantage in life. Yet he committed one of the most brutal crimes in South Korea's modern history. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, this case reminds us that our actions have consequences that echo far beyond our intentions. Jin-ho thought he would inherit millions. Instead, he sentenced himself to life in prison and lost everything his parents had built. For those watching who are parents, this case might prompt reflection on how we balance discipline with encouragement, how we teach our children the value of hard work, and how we help them develop realistic expectations about their place in the world. For younger viewers, it stands as a stark reminder that entitlement and immediate gratification are dangerous motivators that can lead down dark paths. What do you think was at the core of Jin-ho's decision to murder his parents? Was it truly his father's criticism, or was it simply greed? And what would you have done differently if you were investigating this case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated on our upcoming investigations into history's most perplexing crimes. Until next time, this is Detective Shernan, reminding you that justice may sometimes be delayed, but the truth always finds a way to the light. The names in this case have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. This video is created for educational purposes only. Please remember that crime doesn't pay, and the consequences of violence echo through generations.